where benches outlast billboards. Mira lived in a city that measured worth in luminous rectangles, displays, profiles, portfolios. She had an apartment with a view of intersecting highways and a ritual of checking statistics before coffee engagements. Impressions, invitations. She had studied economics and urban design, navigated internships and negotiations, and learned to translate conviction into deliverables. On paper, she was successful. Inside, satisfaction felt more like a series of deferred payments. One autumn evening, after a public forum about a new waterfront development, Mira lingered behind as colleagues debated retail mixes and transit overlays. An elderly woman sat on a bench with a thermos and a battered notebook. The woman, call her June. Though Mira didn't learn the name until later, watched the lights gather on the water with a patient curiosity Mira found almost absurd in a world of deadlines. "Do you come here often?" Mira asked, feeling the polite smallness of the question. "I come when my neighbor's dog needs a walk and the world isn't moving fast enough to drown out the quiet," the woman said. "Besides, I like seeing what people think they want." The woman flipped a page in her notebook and handed Mira a hastily drawn map. It wasn't a map of streets, but of small, annotated places, a bench where a man reads in the rain, a laundromat that plays the same jazz record at 2 in the afternoon, an alcove where teenagers exchange a secret recipe. Each place had a sentence, why this place mattered, who quietly relied on it, what would be lost if it were replaced by glass and a brand. Mira expected a manifesto against development. Instead, she found an argument about aspiration, that the most noble aim in life was not the accumulation of influence, money, or followers, but the steady effort to create conditions where other people's lives could flourish, especially in ways that don't show up on balance sheets. That night, Mira could not sleep. The map's sentences orbited her. We are not only consumers of space. We are custodians of continuity. Ambition that silences communities becomes architecture for loneliness. The idea troubled her like a splinter, small, sharp, and lodged in a place she couldn't ignore. In the weeks that followed, she began to test the thought against the reality she helped shape. She negotiated a contract clause that required small business support during construction. She insisted on retaining a modest row of affordable units in a redevelopment plan. These were small wins, the sort that don't trend. Coworkers called them inconvenient, idealistic, inefficient. Mira called them choices. Her friends celebrated promotions and acquisitions. Social feeds cataloged their triumphs, a ribbon cutting here, a market cap there. Mira appreciated success. She had chased metrics herself for years, but she now measured another currency, whether a project preserved a space where two strangers could meet without an agenda, whether a park bench encouraged an afternoon of shade and conversation, whether a neighborhood could keep its stories when property values rose. The aspiration she cultivated was not dramatic. It was practical, patient, and egalitarian to orient her competence toward sustaining human possibility. That meant sometimes sacrificing faster returns for slower, more dispersed benefits. It meant listening to people whose language wasn't professional jargon. It meant learning to tolerate being misunderstood. Philosophers have long argued about the good life. Is it virtue, pleasure, honor, or autonomy? Myra's yardstick combined these in an unfamiliar ratio. She kept her professional autonomy, yes, but she reallocated honor toward communal integrity. Pleasure became the quiet kind, the satisfaction of a corner retained, a story preserved, a child who could walk to school safely. Her aspiration expanded from personal ascent to relational stewardship. This orientation didn't grant her immunity from doubt. There were nights when she wondered if modest interventions were mere palliatives in a system that rewarded scale and extraction. There were moments when a developer with deeper pockets outmaneuvered her proposals. Still, she persisted. recognizing that aspiration is not measured by consequence alone, but by the consistency and character of the attempt. The most noble aims, she decided, are those that can be sustained without public applause. One Saturday, a community festival came together on a strip of land that had been slated for luxury condos. Locals, volunteers, small entrepreneurs, and Myra's team set up tables, food stalls, and a makeshift stage. People danced in shoes they could not afford to buy anywhere else in the city. A teenager painted a mural that made the corner look like a page from a domestic epic. Myra watched, observing how ordinary life created a map as rich as the old woman's notebook. At dusk, June found Myra again. "You made them a place to remember," she said. Myra shook her head. "I simply argued it should be possible." June smiled. "Possibility is a kind of nobility. You chose it. Choosing possibility," Myra realized, meant more than preserving benches and affordability. It required an orientation to time and relation, a preference for continuity over novelty, for depth over spectacle. It was a form of courage that looked like stubbornness, refusing to reduce people to lines in a spreadsheet, insisting that a neighborhood's handwriting be legible into the future. Her aspiration influenced how she taught interns. She urged them to ask who would be displaced by their models, which voices were missing in public hearings, and why a plaza should exist beyond serving as a spectacle on an annual report. She taught them terminology, but also how to notice. She wanted them to build not just structures, but ecosystems of care. Years later, when a new candidate for city council referenced her projects at a debate, Myra felt embarrassed. The publicity was thin soup compared to the real nourishment she'd tried to preserve. Yet, she recognized a different effect, aspiration as multiplication. The intern who had absorbed her slow insistence now chaired a neighborhood coalition. The teenager who painted the mural enrolled in urban studies. A small business owner stayed because the redevelopment had included rent stabilization. These were ripples, not waves, quiet confirmations that certain values could persist beyond a single life. Myra's story shows that the noblest aspiration is not necessarily what dazzles others, but what enlarges the field of possibility for people whose lives intersect with ours. It demands humility, acknowledging we cannot fix everything, and stubbornness, committing to fixes that aren't flashy. It asks us to value presence over prestige, stewardship over dominance, and patient fidelity over headline achievement. In the end, her life was less a monument than a network of modest continuities, the corner cafe that never closed, a bench where a child learned to tie their shoe, a mural that taught a neighborhood to laugh at its own seriousness. These outcomes were not glamorous, but they were real. They taught Myra something essential, that ambition finds its finest expression when it becomes a tool for enabling others' ambitions. She still enjoyed success. She still negotiated high-stakes deals and wrote applications that impressed juries. But she no longer chased recognition as the ultimate reward. She pursued projects that made it easier for someone else, artist, baker, student, neighbor, to flourish. That, to her, was the truest measure of dignity. On a late spring morning, Myra walked to the waterfront where the city was waking up in its practical, unruly way, mail carriers whistling, vendors arranging produce, a couple planning a wedding in the park. She sat on the same bench June had favored and opened a new notebook. At the top she wrote, "Aspire to conditions, not crowns." Then she began to map the city again, not as a market of opportunities to monetize, but as a ledger of obligations she had chosen to shoulder. The aspiration she kept was a small discipline, repeated daily, to look, to listen, and to act so that possibility, an often fragile, easily overlooked thing, might have more room to breathe. Stewardship, the responsible management and care of something entrusted to one's care. The architect emphasized stewardship of public spaces rather than mere design. Defer, to postpone or delay. She deferred her celebration until the project was complete. Orientation, a habitual or characteristic direction of interest or attention. His career orientation shifted from profit-driven projects to public service. Palliative, relieving symptoms without addressing the underlying cause. Temporary alleviation. Small grants provided a palliative for structural inequalities, not a cure. Fidelity, faithfulness to a person. Cause, or belief demonstrated by continuing loyalty and support. Her fidelity to the neighborhood's history guided every policy decision she made. Augur, to predict or indicate a future outcome. Early community engagement augured better long-term success for the development. Ecosystem, social, a complex network of interconnected people and institutions that support one another. Urban planners must design with the city's social ecosystem in mind, not just individual buildings. Multiplicity, a large number or variety. The condition of being multiple. The project's impact showed itself in a multiplicity of small, meaningful benefits.